Hello, my name is Sara King and I work for Rewilding Britain as the Rewilding Network lead, and I'm here to talk about countryside stewardship in a rewilding setting. So just a little bit about Rewilding Britain for those who don't know what we do. We have three main areas that we focus on. Those are catalysing rewilding, which is where the Rewilding Network comes in. So we don't have any projects on the ground ourselves, but we aim to try and support and advise all rewilding projects across Britain who are aiming to rewild land, but also rewild seas. We work on influencing policy and looking at what the barriers are to rewilding and doing our best to try and remove some of those barriers through policy work, speaking with a whole range of different stakeholders. And we also engage members of the public in rewilding, promoting what rewilding looks like in a British context, how it can help with the climate and biodiversity crises, and just engaging and busting some of those myths around what rewilding actually is. So just a clarification around what rewilding is. We know that it has several different meanings and can mean different things to different people. So our definition of rewilding is that rewilding is the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature can take care of itself. And this is very much a journey. It's not about closing the gate and walking away. Our ecosystems are damaged with a lot of missing pieces. So that wouldn't necessarily be the best thing for nature. So often we need to have a look at how can we kickstart those natural processes, how can we restore them through some initial interventions and some initial management, but with the long-term aim of restoring those natural processes and allowing nature to take the lead and us to take a step back from the management and intervention of those areas. It also encourages a balance between people and nature. We are very much a part of nature, so we need to make sure that there's the community and the people element to all rewilding projects as well, and that's something that's really important to us. And underneath this definition of rewilding, we have 5 principles of rewilding. Those are supporting people and nature together. As I say, people are very much a part of these rewilding landscapes and a very important element. Working at nature's scale, we do need a certain level of scale for rewilding, mainly because we need to have space to allow natural processes to dominate. We can still rewild at smaller scales, but we need to accept that that will require more intervention from us as we try to mimic those natural processes. We have a principle, obviously, to let nature lead the way and to put the pieces in place to allow nature to then lead the way. And also creating resilient nature-based economies and securing benefits in the long term. We've just released a report around nature-based economies to show how rewilding can support more jobs and more diversity of jobs within our land. And we also need to look in the long term. So often when we're looking at funding applications, we're looking at the next 5, 10, 15 years. But rewilding is very much a long-term process. So we need to be looking more at what are these landscapes going to look like in 50, 70, 100 years' time. And this is an illustration of what a rewilding landscape could look like in our uplands. We've got an animation that shows the transition of this on our website for anyone who wants to find out more. But really it's trying to look at a bit more of a mosaic of different habitats. And this won't be habitats that stay the same. It will be very much an ever-changing, dynamic landscape. So you can see there's lots of trees in this valley, but there's also lots of grassland and scrubland. And what we would expect to see with herbivores in this landscape is this ever-changing mosaic as the herbivores fight back against the succession and the scrub and the trees start to grow up as natural regeneration of woodland. And we see much more naturalised woodland than we'd see ordinarily. You'll also see the river in the middle of this illustration has been re-wiggled, and we've got some natural meanders there. It's functioning in a more natural way than a straightened river would. We've also got some standing water here that's being held back by a beaver dam, so beavers are back within this landscape. And you'll see lots of other animals that are back in this landscape as well. Maybe at some point in the future we might have an opportunity to have lynx back within our uplands and lowland habitats. You've got wildcat kittens. But really this is just trying to illustrate what a core rewilding area could look like. There's also people within this landscape, so you'll see that there's still farm buildings and nature-based enterprises being supported by rewilding in the long term. Just on to the benefits of rewilding, it's just worth bearing in mind that the UK is ranked 189th out of 218 for biodiversity intactness. So we are really low in that ranking, and I think we can definitely do more to bring ourselves back up. Rewilding isn't going to be the solution to this, but it gives us a really good opportunity to restore wildlife abundance as well as species richness where it's suitable. So where rewilding is suitable and where it's being put in place, we've started to see benefits around it, drawing down carbon from the atmosphere, helping wildlife to adapt to climate change. So by restoring wildlife corridors, we can start to allow wildlife to have movement through the landscape, so that they can move further north as the climate warms and as some of those habitats might become unsuitable for them. It can also help to reverse biodiversity loss, and we've seen a return of abundance in a lot of rewilding projects, including a few things that we weren't expecting to see, like the classic stories of turtle doves and purple emperors returning, and nightingales returning to the Knepp estate in Sussex. So we can start to create more dynamic landscapes that can support more biodiversity, but also biodiversity where we wouldn't necessarily expect to see it. Rewilding can support diversified nature-based economies through the network evidence base that we've started to develop. We've seen that rewilding projects have, on average, increased the number of jobs by 50%, and the number of volunteer opportunities has increased tenfold. So there's very much people within these landscapes. And rewilding can also improve our own health and well-being, not just physical health and well-being, but also mental health and well-being as we get to enjoy these more dynamic landscapes. So the Rewilding Network is the network that I lead on. It's a community of landowners, land managers, project managers who are rewilding land and sea. If you go onto our website, you'll be able to see the full map of all the projects that are on the network at the moment, as well as a bit of information behind them about what they're doing. They're all doing very different approaches. Every site is unique, and I think this is what's really exciting about rewilding, is there's no off-the-shelf solution. There's no one-size-fits-all. It's very unique depending on where you are in the country, what habitats you've got on site, and the different approaches that you're going to take. And it's still really innovative. We're all still really learning as we go as well, which is why the Rewilding Network community is helping to exchange some of that practical learning, innovation, and hopefully build a bank of practical resources for rewilding. So I just wanted to spend a couple of slides just talking about what rewilding looks like, because as I say, it's very different and unique depending on where you are, and no project is the same. And all of these landscapes are dynamic and ever-changing. So this is some photos of some of the lowland rewilding projects that we've seen joining the network. Up in the top left is an example of the Knepp estate. On the left, you'll see this is the before aerials. On the right, this is several years later, and you'll start to see that the hedgerows are growing out. We're getting more of this wood pasture type habitat emerging as natural regeneration of trees and scrubs starts to occur from the hedgerows and from the existing woodland. And as you'll see, a lot of the time there's native breed livestock of cattle and horses and pigs within this landscape, creating a dynamic, ever-changing landscapes as the pigs rootle up the habitats, creating bare earth and resetting that succession. And then we start to see the cattle coming in and grazing and causing all sorts of impacts as well. So herbivores are very much part of this system. And then we also see things like heathland down in Dorset, where we're starting to get more trees naturally regenerating in these areas, and just much more dynamic, mosaic, I guess, messier landscape, which is great for wildlife. In the uplands, again, we get very different results depending on where they are. We know upland areas are harsher, takes a lot longer for things to happen. And generally speaking, rewilding projects in our upland environments do need a little bit of a helping hand. So they often have tree planting associated with them to restore that natural seed source, which is usually missing, and supplementary tree planting just to help out the natural regeneration. So we also see herbivores within these upland areas, but they tend to be in much lower densities because a lot of the time vegetation just needs a bit of a kickstart. So again, we get different landscapes depending on where we are. These examples are from the southern uplands of Scotland as well as the Lake District, and again I'll encourage you to go onto the Rewilding Network map so that you can have a look at the full range of projects that we've got on there. So on to countryside stewardship options for rewilding projects. It can be quite tricky, especially because a lot of rewilding projects have different habitats. They have mosaics of different types of habitats, from some areas of species-rich grassland through to other areas that are becoming scrubby and starting to become woodland. And the herbivores in the mix also create this ever-changing dynamic landscape. So it can make it really difficult to know which countryside stewardship options to select, especially because rewilding isn't outcome focused. We're very much looking at letting nature lead the way. So we're not having set outcomes in terms of the amount of grassland, the type of grassland, or the amount of particular habitats that we expect to see. So it makes it really difficult, and what you don't want is a situation where you've got lots of different countryside stewardship schemes across different patches of your land. That just will make it really difficult to manage. So co-design with your advisor is really important, and this is something that we've had fed back from network projects. Sitting down with your advisor and co-designing your countryside stewardship application is vital, because you need that element of flexibility, but you also need to make sure that it works in line with your countryside stewardship options. Generally, the feedback we get from the network is that projects tend to use wood pasture countryside stewardship agreements. Now, this isn't going to be suitable for everywhere. You usually need to have historical wood pasture proven, so looking at historical maps or looking at the habitats that you've got there, and it's not going to be a suitable option for everywhere, but it seems to be quite a good option for a lot of the rewilding projects that we start to see coming through as part of the network. And this wood pasture will cover most of the project and will enable this mosaic of emerging scrub, trees, grassland with the herbivores within the landscape. So it seems to be quite a good fit for a lot of these rewilding projects. It's only available for higher tier agreements, so it needs to be higher tier stewardship. And I think under the old payments, projects generally received about £400 per acre and over 10-year agreements. But I understand that the prices are changing, so you'll probably want to check the most recent countryside stewardship costs. Rewilding projects also tend to access other areas of countryside stewardship, so organic conversion payments is quite a common thing that comes through as part of rewilding projects, especially those that are going from agricultural land to a more rewilding landscape. And SP8, which is the Native Breeds at Risk supplement, is another one that can be accessible to a lot of rewilding projects. We see native breeds like longhorn cattle, red poll cattle, Exmoor ponies, some of which are under the Native Breeds at Risk register. So again, it gives you the opportunity to have an additional supplement as part of your countryside stewardship payments when you're hosting these herbivores within your landscape. Countryside stewardship also gives rewilding projects the opportunities to access capital works payments, so things like perimeter fencing that might need to be installed to allow extensive grazing of your rewilding project, but to stop them from going into neighbouring areas. So perimeter fencing. Other infrastructure can also be partly covered by capital works grants. Tree planting where it's suitable. So if you don't have a natural seed source, you might need to look at tree planting, and there are grant options for that as well. And also livestock handling facilities for those projects that choose to have low numbers of grazing animals across their land to mimic that natural grazing process. And farming in protected landscapes is increasingly becoming an option that rewilding projects are also considering as part of their transition towards the future ELM scheme. So as I say, it's very much different depending on which rewilding project that you have, but I think there are examples across the network and probably across England of projects that are successfully accessing countryside stewardship to support their rewilding journeys. Thank you very much.